Okay, we've kind of had a little bit of a cleanup, but I want to kind of clean up some more and also make it so that the player can actually have some form of sprite. Now for this, I'm thinking of kind of abstracting away some of the bits of the player out so that we can kind of reuse parts. For instance, I want an X and Y to exist in something called an entity. I want to also have some form of sprite on the entity. So I think first thing I want to do is make a like an entity class. So let's say class entity. Give it a constructor. I want to take in an X, a Y, width, height, and a sprite. So this dot X equals X, and so on. And let's start sprite. Okay, so now we've got this simple sort of entity that has an X, a Y, width, height, and a sprite. So it's a thing in the game, or in the general render scope. Also, we probably want to like be able to render it and update it. So I'll say update. It can be overridden and render or draw. We've been using draw for everything, haven't we? So draw for now. For draw, I want it to be something like context.draw image. I need to pass it the image, which is the sprite. I want to give it the X, so this dot X sprite will also be this dot sprite on it. Let's see, I want to this dot Y. Need a width and height, so this dot width and this dot height. That should draw. So now if I inherit from entity, so if I say player extends entity, what that means is all of these properties are actually copied from here. So we don't actually need the internal properties of these. We don't need the width and the height here. What we do need to do is do what we call super. And literally use this as the constructor for the other one. So we want X, Y, width, height, right. But I'll kind of do the construction. I'll not do height. No. So now it's inherited those things. Now the draw is this one instead of the other one, but we're overriding draw. So I want to stop overriding draw, save that. Let's see if that works. I'm just going to refresh and it's gone. So something wrong. What have I not done? Think about this. If the sprite is expected to be there and we don't have a sprite in player, then that means we need to take in a sprite from player. So sprite. And that also means when we're making our new player, we have to kind of give it a sprite. For now, I'm just going to use the rock. I'm going to reuse the rock one. So if we go down to where we're creating our player, let's just say rock. So these. So instead of a blue thing, if I refresh this, we have this rock texture that is the player's sprite. So we're able to kind of give the player an actual sprite to work with. So it's got its own little icon. That being said, that means if we make the player width and height different, then we can, let's say I want to do to, let's say 100 by 100 instead. Now if we refresh, we have 100 by 100 sprite there. So it's entirely sort of rendered based upon the actual width and height. So now we have the concept of an entity. We also have the concept of inheritance. We're inheriting the different attributes of the entity class. We theoretically could override certain things like functionality and things by using stuff like this and refreshing the page. Now we've gone back to drawing just a blue square because we've overridden the draw functionality. So we can still override things, which means that we can reuse the entity class for different things. Now, I'd like to go one step further down the chain. So we've got the concept of the entity being extended. Now, at this point, update does nothing, but draw does something. How about we extend the entity again? So we'll make a new class called mob, meaning movable object, that extends entity. So we want a constructor. This wants to take in the same sort of thing. So we want an X, a Y, a width, a height. This time we also want a, what other things? VX and VY. Maybe a speed. It's movable. I think that'll do for those. Plus, obviously, we need the sprite. There we go. So now we've kind of got this idea of extra bits built upon the top of entity. So we'll do our super. In fact, we can copy the super here because we're going to be using those. And then we'll just do whatever's left over. So this dot Vx equals Vx. This dot Vy equals Vy. This dot speed equals speed. So now we've got an extension chain of entity down to mob. Now what I want to do is I want to swap out entity here for mob. And where we have our X, Y, width, height, we want to pass it. Well, Vx is going to be 0 for now. Vy is going to be 0. Speed is going to be whatever speed been passed in. And sprite. So now we can get rid of this Vx and Vy here and the speed here. So we're kind of slowly cleaning up the player class. So as we can see, we've got all this. Now, if we add the concept of in the mob, we want to update. And draw. Now for draw, I want to do super dot draw, I think. I don't remember whether it's super without the thing or super with the thing. So I'll try that, see if that works. If not, deal with it. So that's now extending that draw. So let's see what happens. There we go. So we now have a player that's extending mob and a mob that's extending entity. We don't want to go too deep in this. We don't want to go, okay, now player has like 50 other depth of stuff. But in general, we now have the concept of inheritance and extension of things that we're doing. At this point, color is slightly redundant, but we've just left it there for brevity. It does mean that we could, for movable objects, we could have a default sort of ability to move, if you know what I mean. That's could be anything. And then we could just override it with whatever we give it. So in theory, we could give like default mob movement to be something like the way the ball works, for instance. We kind of do something like that. As like the default movable object. So we could kind of do this, and that way we could extend, we could make a ball class that extends mob and go further, but we're not going to do that in this particular one. But hopefully that's made sense. And we have some concept of extending a class with a class. And give it prototype your inheritance, where it's used this as a prototype and built out on that prototype. So that way we kind of have these blueprints of a concept of a prototype here. Then we're building on that with the next prototype, and then we're building on that even more with our sort of end prototype that we use in the actual program. Hopefully this has been useful. I'll see you again in the next one.